You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
David Swinson.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories, the podcast where we bring you the story behind the stories and the storyteller. Author interviews, writing advice, book reviews, all sorts of great stuff. If you are a book lover, Author Stories is the place for you. We have more than 550 author interviews in our archives at hankgarner.com. Please go over there and check it out. Also, check out our YouTube channel, where we also have all of the episodes archived there. If you don't find an author interview that you're looking for on the website, click on the Archives tab. There's a long list of them where you can click and download and listen right there. I'd like to tell you about some sponsors that make the show possible. Pico's House. The Pico's House website now has a new look. Visit Crystal Pico Watanabe and her team of 8 people who help her provide services to fiction authors. Crystal's full slate of services now include beta reading, manuscript critique, developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Authors, you can also inquire about putting your books in her new Book Lovers box, which is a monthly digital subscription box with a different theme each month. This is free for authors for a limited time. PicosHouse.com, that's PIKKOSHOUSE.com, for all your book publishing needs. Devin Ford, Recon, the Expansion Series Book 1. Hundreds of years in Earth's future sees the United Global Territories striving to colonize the Moon and Mars. The discovery of a clean energy source ended the world's reliance on fossil fuels overnight, and years after the resulting wars, a new discovery puts the tenuous world peace at risk. That of faster-than-light travel. With humanity on the verge of traveling to new solar systems and all the humanitarian and scientific possibilities involved, a discovery by the reconnaissance team turns everything upside down. Join the small team of the reconnaissance mission who fight friend and foe to complete their mission objectives, no matter where it leads them or what the personal cost. Devin Ford, Recon, the Expansion Series, Book 1. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have David Swinson on the show with me today. David has a phenomenal new book called Trigger that you guys are going to love. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you.
David, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
That actually takes no thought. Because I was like 16 years old, 17 years old, and I knew I was going to be a writer, and I didn't know that life was going to take me on a bunch of detours, but I ended up writing my first book, about 386 pages, I don't know how many words, over the summer, and about when I was 17, and got my first rejection about a year later, and so that I started, I think, and it was a pretty bad rejection letter, and I think that if the editor had realized that I was maybe a 17-year-old kid, she would have been a lot easier on me, but so that was the first and almost the last, because I was devastated.
Wow!
But I always knew.
You always knew it was there.
Yeah.
Well, you pursued that, but it wasn't the time yet. Obviously, what did you go on to pursue?
Well, after Cal State Long Beach with a film major, I thought I'd go into the film industry and actually write screenplays and stuff like that. But as it happened, I met the wrong girl. And no, it was actually cool because I this was in Long Beach, California, and got introduced to punk and alternative music, and I was always into music, and so that just took me on a course of like 14 years where I would end up having 2 venues that I booked and promoted, and I booked everyone from the Red Hot Chili Peppers to the Pixies to Social Distortion to some major hardcore punk bands to some softer stuff like well, not softer. I mean, like Nick Cave of the Bad Seeds and stuff like that. And what's interesting is that the writing element really even stayed there because I had a slow night for one of the clubs. So I thought of doing an evening of conversation on Wednesday night. And I got hooked up with this guy, Bill Stanky, who at that time was doing a lot of the college tours and stuff like that for everyone from Hunter S. Thompson to Tim Leary to all these people. So, they started speaking at Bogart's at a nightclub setting, and Hunter S. Thompson too. And then, so I got a lot of writers and poets. And,
so crazy.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
This would have been the 80s, early 80s when this kind of took off?
Yeah, from 83 to 89, and then I sort of segued into film finally.
Wow.
And then,
I was a
cop later.
I was a teenager in the 80s, and that whole underground punk scene, and kind of mixed in with the skateboarder scene, and I remember someone handed me a Bad Brains tape. And I guess, I can't remember what year it was. It was, mid to late 80s, whenever that was.
Yeah.
And it changed my life, and then you get into, and back when the Chili Peppers were kind of this underground band, and it seems they're kind of mainstream now.
No. You're talking real music when you're talking Bad Brains and Fugazi. And stuff like that.
Yeah, it was.
But you were probably one of the kids sneaking into the shows of, like in those clubs.
well, yeah, and being from the rural South, finding those shows was was a challenge. But you'd road trip and then sneak into a show and say, it's good times. But there was this kind of counterculture, and the 60s counterculture kind of gets a lot of the attention, but there was this other counterculture in the 80s that was, rebelling against the, the parents from the 60s who had grown up and all of that. And
Reaganomics and all that.
Yeah, this whole other thing. And, do you feel like that time period and those people you met and just kind of the scene in general, has that affected your writing or the kinds of stories that you tell? Can you see an influence or the footprints along the way?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I've said this before, but my relationship with Hunter Thompson was like business, but if you could, I did a lot of shows with him over the next few years in the 80s, and if you could just condense that into like hours, that I had some significant time with him, and he was a major influence on me, and Frank Marr is sort of an homage to him in a different way, and then but also the music, I have, for everything I write, I develop playlists, and I have the music that really gets me into the certain moment I want to get into, and it goes back to to that music about the 80s, from the alternative stuff to the really cool punk, like you were talking about, Bad Brains, and then obviously HR.
I love when other writers also create playlists, and some people need complete silence to write, and I kind of need a little controlled chaos going on. But music is one of those things. I think the only other sense that is like this is probably smell, where you can hear a song or you can smell a smell and you're immediately transported to another time, another place, and the memories are very vivid, visceral, almost. And, that's fascinating that you do that as well.
Yeah. No, music is huge in my life, and I introduce it to some extent in the second girl more in Crime Song because it has to do with the vinyl collection. But so it's important in Frank's life too.
Transitioning to this spoken word element in the in the punk and hardcore clubs is really kind of awesome. Henry Rollins has kind of popularized some of that in recent years. But that's kind of been, kids and performers in that scene, that genre, have always had something to say. And I think we relegate, the outcast to, they're just, snotty kids or whatever. But I love that you were doing that, a couple of decades ago. I bet some fascinating conversations came out of that.
Henry was, one of the first ones. And, I had booked Black Flag a lot. And then, a lot of the SST bands like the Minutemen before, D. Boone died. And, but then Henry with the spoken word thing, he did this whole rant, and he'd love to do, go up there on stage and he had a very rehearsed rant on Black Sabbath, and he just went off. And a lot of those things, Hunter S. Thompson, Tim Leary, Abby Hoffman, Jim Carroll, Jello Biafra, Henry Rollins, all of that ended up making it onto a record for Atlantic called Soundbites from the Counterculture.
Yes.
And that was released, and I co-produced with Bill Stanky in 1990, something like that.
Wow.
And but yeah, Henry was a blast. Jello, it was Jello. If he had known, if I don't know if he listens, but if he knows that that guy that booked him and stuff like that, and it became a cop, he probably.
That's hilarious.
Hit out on me. Mike Ness too.
Oh yeah.
No, Mike Ness is now a PTA dad.
What?
Social distortion. Oh yeah, he goes to PTA. That's
amazing.
Secondhand, from someone who lives with him and has the same kid in the same high school. And,
that's amazing.
Isn't that funny? Mike Ness. Such a mommy's little monster.
Yeah. Adulthood chases us all down eventually.
Yeah, it's funny, and a lot of guys you remember the Vandals?
Oh yeah.
Well, one of the Joe Escalante is a lawyer. Another one whose name I'm not going to mention was who played the guitar is now a DEA agent, getting ready to retire. But when he was he's still we're friends on Facebook, and he still goes off on all the Vandals stuff, and it's amazing. Yeah, we grow up.
Yeah, truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
So from the music scene to I can see how your journey to record producer happens. How do you transition into film and then eventually to law enforcement? That seems like a crazy circuitous route to come back to writer.
Yeah, well, Stanky and I, really wanted to get into film. So that record, it was just a one-record thing, and that sort of everything. It's interesting. Everything sort of naturally segued into another thing, through people, like Tim Leary. We ended up, being at his house and talking about wouldn't it be really cool to come up with a movie, it's a road trip movie where along the way the two guys meet up with people like you, Tim, and Hunter Thompson, going off through the desert and stuff like that. We came up with Roadside Prophets, PROPH, and found a home at New Line Cinema, Fine Line, and it ended up starring Adam Horowitz from the Beastie Boys, John Doe, John Cusack, and all these people. So that's when I was thinking, okay, I'm going to do this. I was afraid to produce it myself, so I called Peter McCarthy, who did Repo Man and I'm Going to Get You Sucker and all these things, Tapeheads. And he said, yeah, heck yeah, I'll co-produce this with you. And got Abby Wool, who co-wrote Sid and Nancy, to write it. So it was like, you can't fail, man. But it didn't do as well as New Line had hoped. And oddly enough, it really has a cult following now. A lot of like 20-something kids are like, watching it, and but getting it on online and stuff like that.
Well, it gets a good mention in the new Beastie Boys book.
It does?
Yeah, it does. Horowitz talks about his acting experiences and.
Well, I hope he said that, it was Swinson who taught me how to ride the 750 Triumph. No, I doubt it.
I don't remember that, but
it was scary, man. I mean, that kid, he'd never been on a motorcycle, and, I was a dirt rider, and so I taught him how to ride that bike. And John Doe, too. John was a very good motorcycle rider. With the help of John, too, I mean, Adam got pretty crazy on that Triumph. It was a little scary at times.
That's awesome. Well, when I get Ad Rock on the show, I'll be sure to ask him and tell him that Swinson called him out. Yeah,
that
for sure.
Triumph 750, man, it was and then John's a Panhead. I mean, classic bikes. Yeah, but falling into the film thing, thinking, okay, we're going to be an independent producer. We got this thing, moderate, little success, and so. I had other ventures, and one of them was, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Layla Nabulsi, who was associated with Hunter for many years, was given the rights to do the film for Fear and Loathing. And this is in like 1990, and no one wanted to touch it. And I got frustrated, and there was always something in me that I wanted to be a cop, and it's because, how I was raised. I think my dad, in foreign service and CID and all this stuff, and D.C. always being home base between countries. And I just wanted a real life. I wanted health insurance. I wanted all this stuff. And so I stopped. And Layla, oddly enough, I'm in the academy, and she gets Johnny Depp attached to it, and it gets made. So that's
crazy.
That's cool. I mean, I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad I'm not part of that, and that the road took me here, because I would never have. Frank Marr wouldn't exist. Most importantly, I never would have met my wife and have my lovely daughter. But yeah, the police department years are. That can develop a writer.
Yeah. What's which or can you even grade these? But would your time on the beat or your time talking with people like Timothy Leary, Hunter S. Thompson, do you feel like either of those experiences affected you more deeply as a writer, or do you think they both did, but in different ways?
In different ways, but more so when I became a detective and a part of my job. D.C. is not a municipality, so our prosecutors are the U.S. Attorney's Office, assistant U.S. attorneys. And, excuse me.
That's an interesting fact. I think not a lot of people grasp.
A lot of people. Yeah, we're empowered by Congress, and because it's not a state. I mean, no
right.
Taxation. I mean taxation without representation.
In the truest sense. Huh?
Yeah, but I think the most influential thing for me as a writer, especially learning about drugs and habits and things like that, didn't really come from like Hunter, because he didn't do stuff like that in front of me, but I was a part of this unit called Career Criminal Unit, and I knew that there was one criminal element who I always oddly empathized with, who have their I don't like saying crackheads, but the crackheads and the people addicted to heroin and stuff, they're the ones that have their ear to the curb and know everything that's going on. And they get locked up for, a burglary, sometimes a burglary gone bad where someone gets hurt or something like that. And I said, listen, if they want to, in the presence of the defense attorney, I want to talk to everybody that's locked up in D.C., for that. And that was a lot of people. And so it turned into some incredible investigations because, you go up the track to the guys that are dealing the kilos, but most importantly is you're talking to these guys who, some of their life stories, are incredible, that a lot of them, from good families, a lot of them not, but surprisingly, a good percentage of them were hard workers, had a job, and then, when crack hit the street, it just ruined a lot of lives. But that's where I think I got my most, I was influenced most, was talking to defendants.
When you know someone like Hunter Thompson, and like you said, he didn't do things in front of you, but it's no secret to any of us all of the things. And Timothy Leary, he famously encouraged tuning in, dropping out.
And saying no, K-N-O-W to drugs.
Right, exactly. When you see that and the kind of mind expanding the folks that encourage that, and then you see the darker side, and we can argue all day about the types of drugs, the types of experiences and experimentation and all that, and they may not be equals. But it probably is kind of shocking to see that turnabout and, the maybe realities of the abuse and then the entire fallout for a community. I haven't been in that situation, but I would imagine it could be, a little overwhelming.
Yeah, there's fallout for Hunter S. Thompson. He blew his head.
Well, sure. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And,
everything's not romanticized forever.
Yeah, and that's actually why, not because of that, but why I picked cocaine. It's because cocaine is one of those things that you can easily hide, and actually use a lot of and hide. For Frank Marr, I mean, not for but for Frank.
Tell us more,
Marr.
David.
Yeah, and it is not something that when you start using a lot of it, you start showing some physical type stuff, but not like crack and heroin. I mean, crack you smell on the people. It's a sweet, sickening, sweet smell that sticks to their clothing. And heroin is obvious if someone's a chronic heroin user. I mean, with their body and their fingers and stuff like that. You see that. So I didn't want anything that, and I hate using the word serious because heroin and crack are way more serious drugs than cocaine. But I just wanted Frank to be on a manageable drug.
So as you're working as a cop and then as a detective, as someone who is so tied to storytelling like you are, and has this early desire that you want to be a writer, you want to tell these kinds of stories, and then you are surrounded and inundated by stories, by these people's experiences, and we always talk about that ideas for writers are just everywhere. They're just kind of swimming around. You just need to know which one to grab out of the air, that becomes the story. But as you're working this job and you're collecting kind of all of these experiences and ideas and all that, when did Frank Marr come alive for you?
Well, I never write about any real case or, and everything I write about is based on experience. And I had written a book called A Detailed Man, which was somewhat semi-autobiographical, and it was with a very indie press and very police procedural. And I always wanted to be, traditionally published. Not that I thought that not that it was a status thing, but it's a machine behind it. And I understood the machine because as a detective, you need the machine behind you to do your job and investigate. So to me, it's the same thing with books. I want the machine behind me because I'm not going to promote it. And so I had written a couple of books that were very police procedural, and they got rejected, shelved, and then I always had Frank Marr in my head. Even when I was a cop, but he sort of evolved. At first, it was just a burglary guy, and then all of a sudden he turns into a former detective who's like quietly retired after 16 years, and he was always in my head for 2 years, 3 years, and then finally after those rejections, I just said, I'm going to go outside of myself, and he is so far outside of myself, except for like things like the music and and things like that. And I had fun, I wasn't having fun with police procedures. So I mean, he had been in my head for so long that the second girl just like, I just wrote that, and it was like incredible. And Josh Kendall got a hold of it and preempted it, and they got a 3-book deal from Little Brown Mulholland because of that. So, and I think it's not, but I think the thing is because I realized, I love police procedure. I love Wamba. A lot of friends I know, like Bernard Schaefer and Bruce Coffin and Mark Burgeon, they're writing books really well right now. And Bruce Coffin's doing really well. He's a Maine writer. And they're ex-cops, too. And, it's, but I found, a different voice in Frank Marr.
Well, Frank Marr is a really interesting character because he's a hero that is kind of a complicated hero. He's more, if we were honest with ourselves, he's probably more like most of us than than maybe the typical protagonist in a police procedural. His motives are sometimes a little gray,
Yeah.
or and the reason he does things is skewed sometimes. But what was it about this character and putting him as an ex-cop who's kind of wrestling with demons, and what was it about him that just made that character come alive to you?
Well, I knew two things, going into it. That first of all, how do I make a character like this likable? And it has to be natural. It can't just, I can't just, there's not some magical thing, and that I know of, And then the second thing is I know what irritates me in books and movies and stuff like that is when you have these brooding guys and they're complaining. Frank loves his lifestyle. He loves it. He doesn't complain about his lifestyle ever, and he gets, a little melancholy when it's, like Leslie and, all this kind of stuff, and he starts screwing up. But he doesn't blame the department, and he doesn't argue the lifestyle. He loves it. So I think that those were the two things that were just, to me, that I had to keep focus on, because as long as I did that, I think that, and then had that little story, I think the character would just really evolve. And it was something in my head that was just going to be a trilogy. So the second book was more like the arc, and then the third book, Trigger, is like, well, obviously the end, but not the end of Frank Marr, but it's the end of,
Right. Well, that was going to be my next question is, when you've spent so much time with a character, like this and you've put him through his paces, how do you walk away from him? And am I getting a hint that you're not?
Well, I'm going to walk away from the first person present tense stuff, but I'd like to keep him as a character, but third person, And but I want to take a little break from it for a while, and maybe try a standalone or something like that. And, I have an incredible editor, Josh Kendall, and he's really with his writers. He really works on developing the writer and their careers and everything as writers, and so it might be good for me to break away after this trilogy just for a little bit. But I know what I'd like to do with Frank, obviously because he teams up with somebody in Trigger that could be really cool.
Right. One thing that I love about what you're doing in Trigger is Marr gets to play a little bit of Robin Hood, in that he's robbing some of the dealers and kind of using their assets against them. What was that idea? How did that come to you? And did you immediately know, this is definitely something that Frank would do?
I just knew that was something Frank would do. I don't know. It's like no question, would I do something like that? No, hell no. I mean, I'm not going to do something like that, but I do it through Frank because, obviously I'd be cool to do something like that, to be like a Robin Hood character and like take down these little drug houses and their operations, and then, go help some lady whose house was taken over by it. And at that, I've experienced these things where like her grandsons take over, the house for drug dealing and stuff like that, and she ends up being bedridden. And I sort of wrote that in to Crime Song, and he inadvertently rescues her, just like the second girl, and then in Trigger, he returns to help her with a wad of money, but he always, like says, she calls him the tax man, so he always says, I just collect this as volunteer work, and you can get a load of cash in a bag. What are you going to think? But yeah, and I wanted to take that further, but I just thought it would be a little too Robin Hoody. Yeah.
Well, Trigger is available everywhere now. It's the end of the trilogy for Frank Marr, and the first trilogy that we're going to see from him. David, I love what you're doing. I love the kinds of stories that you're telling. If people are just discovering you as a writer and want to know more about you, is there a place where they can, find your back catalog and dig into all that you do online?
Yeah, it's easy enough. It's at davidswinson.com, SWINSON.com. I've got I think I kind of maybe edited it. The bio is a little bit too much, but it's got some really cool stuff on there, especially for you. You'd be really interested. Just go to this, go to past tense, the little thing I have on my website, and I show all the flyers from, not all of them. I have boxes and boxes of stuff, and so I post a lot of stuff from the past, like the shows I've done. And I think you being, an '80s kid, skate rock, punk rocker, and all that, and into that. The flyer art was very important. I mean, if you remember,
Oh yes, and all hand drawn and
and stuff, Victor Gaislam, who did most of my stuff, is still a friend of mine. He's now a graphic artist for some city in California, and he's still an artist. And look at some of that stuff. It's like it'll blow you away.
I'm looking through it right now, and we've got the Chili Peppers, we've got MIA, we've got John Cole and the Vandals. Oh man, it's amazing stuff here. I'm going to link it up in the show notes so that everybody can geek out with us. Yeah. David, it's been so much fun talking with you today. Please come back on the show again, and let's hang out again and talk writing.
Okay, and thank you very much, Hank.
Thanks for tuning in to Author Stories. Find all the archives at hankgarner.com. Now, stay tuned for a special audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series.
Jason yanked the coils of safety rope to one shoulder and heaved them out the attic window. The bundle bounced over the roofline and dropped to the yard below. He tightened the harness, making sure the shoulder straps were snug over his sweatshirt. He threaded his rope through the braking device, tested it, and clipped everything to the carabiner at his navel. So far, so good. Fireman Mike would be proud. His stomach flipped as he neared the octagonal window. Had he tied the correct knots? Would he get himself killed? Weeks had passed since Mike's tutorial But he had to attempt the break-in now, while both Van Brunts were at the Christmas Eve service. He swung his legs through the window and felt for the roof. His sneakers gripped the shingles and he wriggled out, grateful for once to have feet as big as snowshoes. He pulled on a ski mask and sang, "Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can." He lowered his body. Wind punched him in the jaw like a supervillain, surprising him. His sweatshirt rode up and snow burrowed into his navel. He looked down but couldn't see his feet. He relaxed his hands and put a few ounces of weight on the rope. Clots of snow broke away, dove over the edge, and took far too long to hit ground. He drew his rope around the pipe and pulled tight. Now he could drop. No, you will not drop. You will rappel. You will rappel very safely. He backed towards the edge, towards the point of no return. The backyard lurched into view. It was a 4-story fall, and he'd probably hit the stairs on the way down. He sledded helplessly. His legs fell, swung, and kicked the side of the house. Alarm bells went off in his head. He gripped the rope. It looked like nothing. A shoelace. "Jason Crane, you're a damn fool." He went limp and fell over. The rope gave a jolt, and the harness tried to castrate him. He twisted, trying to save his poor descendants. He began to spin. His arm bashed through a row of icicles. The spin slowed, reversed, and at last he came to a stop with his back to the house, dangling over the backyard. "Thank you, rope. That's a good rope. Well done." He tried to turn around, but couldn't. With patience, he worked out a method of kicking in circles and managed to press his sneakers to the side of the house. He needed slack. He gathered his loose rope to the small of his back and disengaged the brake. Zip! He fell fast, all his weight on the rope now. His feet, planted, shot up over his head. The brake caught him, and the rope vibrated as wildly as a guitar string striking a note of panic. Jason heard a crunching sound and looked up. The leaf gutter crumpled and poured a stream of bitter ice water into his eyes. He snarled and wiped his face, dripping humiliation. Jason rested a moment and stared at his reflection in the glass. He was an enormous Macy's balloon drifting over New Jersey, tethered at the navel like Underdog. "How the hell did you get up here, kid?" He did an awkward split, one foot above the window and the other below, hanging sideways with his weight on one hip. He closed his eyes and reached for the sill, crouching against the side of the house. His fingernails found the weather stripping, and he tugged. Locked. He cursed and tugged again, anger rising. He grabbed the frame with both hands and pulled with all his spider strength. Something popped. The window rose and the curtains splashed out. Jason dove headfirst into the fabric, wriggled and kicked, let out some rope and fell with a whump into his archenemy's lair.